Ever notice how cable news is chock full of rich black people who tell non-rich black people how racism is stopping them from becoming rich black people? We start with Don Lemon.
This is CNN Tonight. I'm Don Lemon. Thank you so much for joining us, everyone.
Now, for a man who routinely complains about racial oppression, Mr. Lemon is doing pretty well. How well?
Show me the money.
Celebrity Net Worth estimates that Don Lemon has a net worth of $10 million. Much of that wealth likely comes from his CNN salary, which is estimated to be in the millions of dollars. He also owns a home in Sag Harbor, New York, which he purchased in 2016 for $3.1 million, as well as a condo in New York's Harlem neighborhood. End of quote. But although he's a public figure, apparently not everybody knows who Mr. Lemon is. Now, God forbid you should run into him and not show him the appropriate amount of respect, as actor Jonah Hill found out.
He was at a hotel and he ran into Jonah Hill, and apparently it wasn't a good meeting between the two.
Supposedly, Don said hi, Jonah shook his hand, and moved on. But Don felt disrespected and ignited a Twitter war. Quote, said hi to Jonah Hill in hotel, think he thought I was Bellman. A lesson to always be kind.
It sounds like he's assuming that Jonah Hill should have known who he is.
What did he really want him to do? I don't get it.
Probably something along the lines of,
oh, Don Lemon, the famous reporter. Oh, CNN, I love you.
Aww. Now, what did Jonah Hill say about all of this?
Jonah wasn't having any of it. He tweeted, I said hi. What are you going to do? Move in with you? I was in a hurry. I didn't realize you were a 12-year-old girl. Peace.
Notice what Lemon did here. He whipped out the race card. Jonah Hill must have thought I was a bellman. But no, Mr. Hill. Mr. Lemon is decidedly not a bellman.
I'm a human being. Damn it. My life has value.
Now, the next rich black host telling non-rich black people that racism is stopping them from becoming rich and black? Van Jones.
Greetings, I'm Dan Jones. This is the Dan Jones Show.
And Mr. Jones, of course, is a foot soldier in the battle against institutional, systemic, and structural racism. Remember election night 2016?
We've talked about race. I mean, we've talked about everything but race tonight. We've talked about income. We've talked about class. We've talked about region. We haven't talked about race. This was a white lash. This was a white lash against a changing country. It was a white lash against a black president in part. And that's the part where the pain comes.
Just how bad is it out there? Real bad.
People have talked about a miracle. I'm hearing about a nightmare. It's hard to be a parent tonight for a lot of us. You tell your kids, don't be a bully. You tell your kids, don't be a bigot. You tell your kids, do your homework and be prepared. And then you have this outcome, and you have people putting children to bed tonight, and they're afraid of breakfast. They're afraid of, how do I explain this to my children? I have Muslim friends who are texting me tonight saying, should I leave the country?
Goodness gracious sakes alive, every man for himself. But white lash has not stopped Mr. Jones. Now, we don't know his salary or his net worth, but check out this little nugget from a celebrity gossip magazine. Van Jones has quite a great earning through his professional career as a news commentator, author, and attorney. Jones has managed to amass a great fortune in millions of dollars through his several attorney projects, shows, and his books. End of quote. Next, we have CNN contributor and Democratic strategist Bakari Sellers.
I think that the comparison that Jeffrey made is intellectually disingenuous at best. And what we saw him do was pervert one of the greatest pieces of literature that we've seen in a very long period of time, in over 100 years, the letter from the Birmingham jail.
Do you understand that some people look at me as being inherently dangerous because I'm a black male? Do you get that? Do you understand?
As Stokely Carmichael once said, a white man who wants to lynch me, that is his problem. A white man who has the power to lynch me, that is my problem. Racism is a question of power, not a question of attitude.
Oh my goodness, everybody down to the bomb shelter. May I point out that when you're talking about black, white, violent interracial crimes, excluding homicide, there are roughly 500,000. Roughly 90% of them are black perpetrator, white victim, only 10% the other way around. So who exactly should be afraid of whom, Mr. Sellers? Speaking of Mr. Sellers, apparently this fear has not stopped him from becoming really, really rich. The Bakari Seller net worth is estimated around $5 million. He earned the good income from his political career. Now his contribution to the show CNN is quite popular these days. Bakari is indulged in various jobs which help him to generate good revenue. End of quote. Next up, Mark Lamont Hill, no relation to Jonah, whose motto ought to be, the race card. Do not leave home without it.
In 2012, you created a list of overrated white people.
Yes.
And Donald Trump was on that list.
He was. I'm a visionary. So now here in America, we say there's a moral failure of police violence. There's a moral failure of police terrorism at times. And there's a moral failure of gun culture for all people. We need to change that. When the Charlottesville events first happened, the president didn't denounce anything. His statements that there are good people on both sides raises moral, ethical, and just very practical question marks.
Actually, Mr. Hill, Trump did denounce neo-Nazis and white supremacists, as ultimately acknowledged by even two of your colleagues on CNN.
So you know what? It's fine. You're changing history, you're changing culture, and you had people, and I'm not talking about the neo-Nazis and the white nationalists, because they should be condemned totally.
Now, elsewhere in those remarks, the president did condemn neo-Nazis and white supremacists. So he's not saying that the neo-Nazis and white supremacists are very fine people, but he is saying people protesting alongside those neo-Nazis and white supremacists are very fine people.
Within the last 10 days, I know that I made reference to those words from the president, and I had a phone caller who called and said, that is not what the president said. Now, having invested the time to go back and zapruder the tape, I think the caller's right, and I think you're right. I think it's true. He'd have done himself a favor if he had verbalized it the way you have with the words monument debate.
Apart from that, Mr. Hill nailed it. Now, he and I had an exchange about Ferguson and about Michael Brown. Bakari Sellers insisted that the police were routinely mowing down unarmed black men. And I told him of all the people killed by black people every single year, the police kill but a tiny, tiny fraction.
Two things. One, I think your earpiece could be broken because the question was on mental health, and you once again go back to the pathologies of the black community. That's stunning to me. But
why do you have to insult me all the time? Why can't you address what I said rather than insulting me? Why is that necessary? Can't we have a discussion as two black men without insulting each other? Is that possible? Can we try and do that, please?
Larry, I haven't insulted you. Larry, I'm not insulting you. What I'm responding to the fact is the...
You said I was sounding a dog whistle. Why do Republicans always use a dog whistle?
I didn't say.
Why don't you deal with what I said, the merits of what I said? Nice. For a change, Lamont, I watch you all the time. You talk over people. You don't listen to the merits of what they say.
You're talking over me. Like, first of all, okay, a few things. I never said dog whistle. Second, you're saying engage what you talked about.
You did.
I just talked. Let me finish. I didn't. When you rewind this, you'll realize you were wrong. What I just spoke about was mental health in the black community. What I just spoke about was mental health in the black community, and you responded by talking about black people and believing that racism still exists. You totally didn't acknowledge my question or respond to my comment. So let's
because I want us to have perspective and talk about what's important, but you won't do that.
Oh no! Well, you don't get to decide what's important. You don't. We all have opinions here. I made a comment. I wanted you to respond to it, but I'll respond to your comment.
You think the problem of unarmed black people is a major problem in America, and I don't.
Okay,
I don't.
Well, let me tell you what I think now that you've spoken. There are two issues here. You mentioned black-on-black crime. You say that that's a problem. I agree with you that it's a problem.
It's a huge problem. A massive problem.
Larry, I agree with you.
One voice, gentlemen. One voice. Mark.
I agree with Larry Elder that black and black violence is an issue. I absolutely agree with him. So let's not argue about what we both agree on. I agree. But if this study bears out, and it does, that that every 28 hours an unarmed black person is killed, then that also is a problem. Is it as big a problem as this other issue?
That means it's less than 2% of the total, Lamont. Less than 2% of the total. 7,000 black people killed every year. Less than 2% are killed by police officers in an unarmed way. So why don't we talk about the 98%? And many of these murders in Chicago are unsolved. At least we know what happened in the Michael Brown case. Now, despite the racist cops mowing down black people, somehow, some way, Mr. Hill, who has an Ivy League degree, has managed to do okay. How okay? Mark Lamont Hill, net worth and salary. Mark Lamont Hill is an activist who has a net worth of $1 million. End of quote. Can you just imagine how big his net worth would be if it weren't for all those racist cops holding him back? Next up, Joy Ann Reid of MSNBC. Hee-haw.
Good morning and welcome to AM Joy.
Now, she too is in the vanguard of the fight against racism and against prejudice.
That didn't last long. Having read the talking points that were scrambled into his hands by nervous Republicans for almost an entire day, Donald Trump pulled a full Charlottesville today. That racist rant by New York attorney Aaron Schlossberg is just the latest viral video putting a spotlight on bigotry in America. And lastly, you've lost the right to rattle on about the party of Lincoln and Reagan. You are now the party of Donald Trump, the party of the alt-right, of Breitbart.com. You've ratified Trump's vulgarity, his crassness. You saw exactly who and what he was, and you chose it. You're going to have to own that.
Now, speaking of bigotry, did you know about Joy Ann Reid's blog post circa 2007, 2008, in which she said some pretty hideous things about gays? Hadn't heard about that? Didn't think so.
Long before this week, Reid was already under pressure for homophobic blog posts more than a decade old. One post suggests Anderson Cooper is the gayest thing on TV, writing that most straight people cringe at the sight of two men kissing. A Twitter user first discovered many of the anti-gay posts, including one that calls homosexual sex gross.
Reid's original explanation? Hackers. She hired a cybersecurity expert to investigate, and her attorney said the FBI had opened a probe. In a statement, he suggested the alleged hackers may have found a password on the dark web to access Reid's account.
Frankly, I couldn't imagine where they'd come from or whose voice that was.
But hey, don't blame her. After all, she was hacked.
I've spent a lot of time trying to make sense of these posts. I hired cybersecurity experts to see if somebody had manipulated my words or my former blog. And the reality is they have not been able to prove it. But here's what I know. I genuinely do not believe I wrote those hateful things.
But then
I had a conversation the other day with a friend who's also an advocate in the LGBTQ community in Florida, who rightly took me to task for my tweets mocking Ann Coulter using transgender stereotypes. I apologize to my friend, and I want to apologize to the trans community and to Ann. Those tweets were wrong and horrible. I look back today at some of the ways I've talked casually about people and gender identity and sexual orientation, and I wonder who that even was. But the reality is that, like a lot of people in this country, that person was me.
Well, for a Harvard-educated recovering homophobe, Miss Reid is doing rather well. Joy Ann Reid has a net worth of $4 million, and her salary is $1.5 million per annum. Joy and her husband are owners of a documentary film company, Image Lab Media Group. End of quote. Like I said, this is cable news, where rich black people tell non-rich black people how racism stops them from becoming rich black people.
We must internalize the flatulation of the matter by transmitting the effervescence of the Indonesian proximity in order to further segregate the crux of my venereal infection.
I'm Larry Elder, and this has been The Larry Elder Show. I'll see you next time.